So I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that things are happening a bit too quickly these days. And the problem of that is that it's never going to be changing as slow as it is today. And especially in financial services, I think that the changes are going to be, or are quite fundamental. Now, at Evry, we believe that there is a different approach needed to solve these problems, to sense and seize the opportunity that arises, because the opportunities in financial services are increasing. They're not decreasing, but there are going to be more people trying to grab them. And it was this insight that brought us to establish the Strategic Design Lab. The established hub and spoke model of banking, I think it was Kirian on the keynote earlier today said that the largest banks of the future he thought would be balanceless. And I think he's actually onto something. I don't think necessarily the hub and spoke model of banking as it is today is the only model for the future. So, as I mentioned, I'm one of the founders of the Strategic Design Lab, and that's a collaborative effort between the design firm Method and the tech firm Evry. Now, I work in parallel as both a designer for the lab, as well as running a startup in fintech. And I think that's also a model that people will be having several different roles in parallel at the same time. It's a Nordic presence. It's currently in Oslo and in Stockholm. We're looking at establishing in Finland as well. And we have outposts, we like to call them outposts, in London, New York, and San Francisco to see what they're doing there. Now, as we've seen, digital is transforming every industry, and it's transforming media, and it's transforming telco, and it's transforming, transport. And the thing with it is, lessons learned in one sector is very quickly adapted and applied to a different sector through what you could call network adjacency jumps. So it's seeing what's working in one sector and say, well, we could do the same thing in this sector. And this is accelerating because we see that it unlocks a great deal of new value. Just as we, sorry for the resolution there, but just as we finally cracked the code of creating this really, really user-friendly, PFM-enabled app for banking. Then the chatbots came and learned Finnish. And suddenly the UI is maybe not so necessary anymore. Someone would say that the AI, artificial intelligence, is the new user interface. I think people are getting used to the services becoming much more attentive, much more intelligent than they were before. The screen, screen interface, I really believe is disappearing. It's disappearing into the background, and the service becomes contextual. Our surrounding starts to listen and observe what we're doing, and that might sound creepy for us now, but I think when the services are relevant, they're engaging and on your terms, we're actually going to start to like it. We expect to start to talk to our service provider. We don't have to sort of take off our gloves in the middle of the freezing Finnish winter to start tapping on your phone. You just talk to it. And we've been working a long time trying to help. How do we get the elderly to start using digital? Well, I think we posed the question the wrong way around. It's how do we get the digital services to be able to communicate with the elderly? And that's through a natural language interface. It's not through a screen. They're not used to a screen. It's much easier for them to talk to something. So I think you can imagine, and we have the technology already there to understand very complex instructions, such as, Alexa, the Amazon box, right? Alexa, please, find the best offer to refinance my Volvo. Not necessarily the cheapest, but the one that works the best for me. You know what I like. That kind of instruction, that kind of natural language way of interacting with the machine, that's what we're looking at. It's not a great user interface on a mobile screen anymore. I don't know if you noticed that on the last version of the iPhone, they took away the phone jack, right? Now, that was a big deal about that being, well, it's about making it design more efficient and stuff like that. But in reality, this is the reason. This is the AirPod phones, and what it does, it gives you the ability, or it gives Apple rather, the ability to be in your ear the whole time. It creates that interface, the language, natural language interface between you and Siri. And it gives Siri the ability to interact digital. So it becomes the watch closer to your screen, gets the time series data of your body, and the access to your ear to be able to interact with you and communicate more efficiently than through the screen. So it's less about the pixels and more about the experience. How do you create an experience that is really useful and relevant? And this is why the discussion about data is so important. How do you provide the insight and the data to truly be relevant, useful, and engaging to your customers? So if Brett King said once that banking is so, I think it was in a Bank 3.0 book. Banking used to be somewhere you go, and now it's something you do. Now, just last week, I think Christopher Hernes, the new CDO at Skandiabanken in Norway, he wrote on LinkedIn, I think he's spot on, that in the future, banking, it may well be just something that just happens. It's implicit. It's an implicit service. It's not a high interest service other than certain points in time, but it is an implicit service. And the design of the services, of financial services, needs to reflect that. Now, this may be very much a rapid change and fundamentally change in business model of banking, but it has really been a long time coming. I don't know if you know this book, Nicholas Negroponte wrote in Being Digital. It's about 20 years old, and it describes in detail and in very good accuracy exactly what is happening when services become digital. At the same time, Richard Norman, I think he was actually Finnish born, but he's usually a Swedish professor. He wrote about what happens when the map changes the landscape. So basically, what happens when the offering, the service, becomes digital, and the businesses need to change from thinking about producing and distributing to actually servicing a need that is from the outside and in, which means that you change the way from back to front, and also from the top, from the outside to the inside. And he saw this as a natural evolution of any industry. That you go from being a production logic, produce it as efficiently as possible, into a product logic, which is, pile on the number of features. Think about mobile phones, about how this was happening, right? Pile on new features and functions, and that will keep you competitive. Then move it into a service logic. So let's move it and create a service. Now, most people don't really own their mobile phones anymore. They don't think about it. But usually, you buy it on a financed plan, and then you switch it. And some telco companies are now giving you agreements so that you actually switch it year by year. You feel that you own it, but you don't really own it. Now, the final step is when you start to look at a co-creation logic, when the customer becomes part of creating or delivering the service. Now, he said that the transformation for any company in any industry going through these changes is really in 3 dimensions. The first is, what is the customer offer? How do you create a customer offer that is really useful, relevant, and engaging? The 2 is how does the company then redesign or reorganize around that new customer offer? And 3rd, and probably most important and certainly most difficult, how does the culture of the organization change so that you move from selling to your customers and to create a true relationship with the customer? That is a fundamental change, and I think that's the one that is most difficult, because every time you think about, well, what's in it for us, rather than what is in it for me, rather than what's in it for us as a partnership. Question is, when is your customer equity as important as, or linked to your company equity? I'll get back to that point later on. This is especially important in banking, because banking as an industry is going through this perfect storm of changes. It's not just social culture shifts, new changes in customer behavior and customer requirements. It's also linked to changes in regulatory requirements. We have a strong regulatory move towards, on one end, opening up for new competitors, which is PSD2 and GDPR and all this stuff. And on the other hand, we have regulations like Basel II and III and everything else that keeps clamping down on the capital providers. So that double whammy of regulation is fundamentally challenging the incumbents of the industry. And the third, of course, is new technology. Now, all of these things are driving that change towards a co-creation ecosystem. And this is where the strategic design comes in. Now, it's easy, and when you talk to designers and you talk to them about strategic design, they think about it, well, we need to design it with a long-term perspective on it. Now, strategic design in this case is really merging traditional management consulting strategy, business strategy, with design thinking and design approaches. Because we believe that it's not just about understanding sort of the customer focus. And customer focus, think about that. Customer focus is not looking at the customer. Understanding customer focus is understanding what the customer is focused at, what the customer is looking at. And that's a slightly different perspective, because then you need to look at from their perspective, not from your perspective. And that changes the business model, it changes the product, and of course it changes the organization to unlock real value for the customer. But regrettably, that's not enough, because and I see that with a lot of service designers. We get stuck in trying to overanalyze and trying to understand the customer. Because we look at the customer, we do the customer insight, we do the customer journeys, we do the pain point analysis, and we find the gaps, and we find everything, and we design the perfect process. And then we really ask the customer to do the innovation for us. Like Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Because they don't necessarily know what the possibilities are, and that's the company's responsibility to provide the Wayne Gretzky approach to design. So basically understand to skate to where the puck is going to be, not where you are currently. So strategic design is adding the foresight to the insight. Now, I'll take you through a couple of slides on also the methodology. How do we do that, right? The first is, of course, to understand the strategic sector. Every business, every company that has a competitive or is competitive or in the market, they have a strength. They have strategic strength. They have a demographic. They have a culture, things that makes them unique. Now, that gives you a strategic sector in which you can evolve. Now, linking that with the customer need, customer understanding to find the opportunities going forward. As you evolve and your customer requirements evolve, how do you identify where to make your investments? And putting that into a framework, saying that there are three levels of innovation here, right? The first is, of course, how do you create better products, better existing core products. This is your robotics. This is your AI. This is your understanding your own competitive, basically making your existing product better. The next level is the extension. So basically, how do you extend your value chains? Who are your partners, the natural partners of the current model that you can partner with, that you can evolve with, that you can build parallel processes with? And then the third level is this, call it new, call it basically speculative investments into things that are going to fundamentally change you, that could potentially become much larger than you. Because these are the elements that are potentially disrupting your current business, and you have to. It's better to place a bet there than someone else to do it. And the point is to manage this as a portfolio. This is just a portfolio of different investment opportunities that you have, with different strengths, different probabilities of risk, and you manage that as a portfolio of services. And these have different trajectories, right? They move at different paces. And finally, I'll leave you with that. I think it was one of the keynote speakers earlier today, CLV. It's the most important metric in banking, in my view. This is the customer lifetime value. Now, customer lifetime value is customer equity. Now, if you look at customer equity for a bank, is uniquely strong because compared to any other industry, banks have almost generational relationships with the customers, very low churn, which gives you a unique ability to invest in your customer lifetime because you have such a long time to recuperate that investment. So basically, the CLV is the margin, which is the customer income or customer revenue minus the customer cost times the retention rate divided by a discount rate. And that's a time series over time. And given that you have like 20 years relationships, this is a very important time. Now, using that number to use into your business case is extremely important because this is going to influence what gives you the short-term revenue versus the long-term revenue. And it influences the change in customer equity, changes that model quite heavily. So the question there is, when did you last change your business case? The Excel sheet, the actual Excel sheet, not the sort of this is the case, but it's a negative, but since it's a new and exciting innovation, we do it anyway. Not that one, but the one that is the actual business case, without the excuses. Changing that business case is really the next step. Putting in different types of metrics to measure what is a success. So I'll leave you with that. 3. 1 is combining your strategic strengths and your anticipated customer need. 2 is managing investment as a portfolio. And 3, use a customer equity equation to evaluate the investments, innovation, and product development. If it increases your customer equity, it's going to increase your equity as well. Thank you.